If you're sitting in a room right now that feels just a little too warm, not unbearable, but uncomfortable enough that you can't fully relax, what I'm about to show you could completely change how you experience heat for the rest of your life. Because for less than the price of a cup of coffee, there is a simple object. Something so ordinary you've probably walked past it dozens of times without thinking twice, that can make your room feel dramatically cooler in a matter of minutes. Not by lowering the temperature the way expensive machines do, but by using a principle so effective that it can make a hot room feel up to 10 degrees cooler almost instantly. And the reason you've probably never heard this explained properly is not because it doesn't work, but because most people have been trained to believe that comfort only comes from complex, high-cost solutions. Entire industries have been built around that assumption. But what you're about to learn is based on physics that has been understood for centuries, used long before modern air conditioning ever existed, and quietly overlooked in the way we design and live in our homes today. Stay with me, because once you understand how this works, you will never look at heat, or the way air moves through your space, the same way again. Right now, this isn't just about feeling slightly uncomfortable in a warm room. It's part of a much larger problem that is becoming more serious every year. According to the International Energy Agency, more than 2.2 billion people around the world still do not have access to air conditioning, which means billions are exposed to extreme heat with little to no protection. And this is no longer a distant issue happening somewhere far away. During the 2022 heat waves across Europe, over 61,000 excess deaths were recorded, many of them among older adults living without adequate cooling systems. In the United States, cities like Phoenix experienced record-breaking stretches of temperatures above 110 degrees Fahrenheit, pushing emergency rooms beyond capacity, with cases of heat stroke and dehydration. At the same time, even in developed countries, millions of households avoid using air conditioning simply because of the cost. The average American family spends over $2,000 a year on energy, with a significant portion going toward cooling during the summer months. For many people, turning on the air conditioner is no longer a default choice. It's a financial decision. And as global temperatures continue to rise, what used to be a matter of comfort is quickly turning into a matter of survival. So what if the solution to all of this was not a $1,000 machine bolted to your wall, constantly draining electricity every hour it runs, but something that costs less than $4 and uses almost no power at all? What if staying cool was never really about producing cold air, but about understanding how air is supposed to move through a space in the first place? Because the truth is, long before modern air conditioning existed, people were already cooling their homes effectively, using nothing but airflow, structure, and a set of physical principles that have not changed in hundreds of years. The real secret is not hidden inside advanced technology. It is hidden in plain sight, in the basic physics of moving air that most modern buildings simply ignore. The foundation of this entire method starts with something called cross-ventilation, a concept so simple that it is often overlooked, yet powerful enough to completely transform how air moves through a room. Cross-ventilation occurs when air enters a space through one opening and exits through another, creating a continuous flow rather than allowing air to stagnate. But this is not just about opening two windows and hoping for a breeze. When the positioning is correct, the airflow begins to organize itself in a way that actually accelerates as it moves through the space. This is where the Bernoulli principle comes into play. As air is forced through narrower openings or directed pathways, its speed increases while its pressure decreases, which in turn pulls even more air into the system. Instead of passive movement, your room begins to behave like a controlled channel where air is actively drawn from one side to the other. In practical terms, this means the air inside your space can move faster than the natural wind outside, amplifying even the slightest breeze. When this effect is combined with a simple fan placed strategically, the airflow becomes even more consistent and powerful, pushing stale, warm air out while continuously pulling in fresher air from outside. The result is not just moving air, but accelerated airflow that actively replaces the air in the room, creating the conditions needed for real cooling to occur. But here's the part that most people misunderstand. Because the cooling you feel from moving air is not actually coming from the air itself becoming colder. Instead, it comes from how your body responds to airflow through a process known as evaporative cooling. When your skin produces sweat, Even in very small amounts, you may not consciously notice. That moisture sits on the surface of your skin and begins to absorb heat from your body. In still air, that moisture evaporates slowly, which means the heat removal process is limited. But when air moves across your skin, it dramatically accelerates evaporation, pulling heat away from your body much faster. This creates a powerful cooling sensation even if the actual air temperature has not changed at all. In fact, a gentle airflow of just 1 to 2 miles per hour can make the air feel several degrees cooler. And as the airflow increases, that perceived temperature drop becomes even more significant. What this means is that your comfort is not controlled purely by temperature, but by the interaction between airflow and your body's natural cooling system. By increasing air movement, you are essentially helping your body do what it was already designed to do, but far more efficiently. That still leaves one important question. Because if the outside air becomes cooler at night, why does your room often continue to feel hot for hours afterward? The answer is something building scientists call thermal mass. And once you understand it, the behavior of your room starts to make perfect sense. Every surface around you, your walls, your floor, your ceiling, your furniture, and even dense objects like books or countertops, absorbs heat throughout the day and stores it. Then, long after the sun goes down and the outdoor temperature begins to drop, all of that stored heat continues to radiate back into the room. That is why a bedroom can still feel warm late at night even when the air outside feels noticeably cooler. The room itself has become a heat reservoir. This is also why simply opening a window for a few minutes often does not solve the problem, because the air may change briefly, but the heated surfaces remain. What actually works is flushing that stored heat out over time by moving cooler night air continuously across those surfaces. As that airflow passes over the walls, floor, and furniture, it strips away the heat they have been holding and carries it out of the space. In other words, you are not just cooling the air, you are resetting the entire thermal condition of the room, so it starts the next day from a much lower heat baseline. So this is where the theory becomes something you can actually use. And the setup matters more than most people realize. The first step is to wait until the outdoor air is cooler than the air inside your home, which usually happens later in the evening after the sun has gone down. Once that happens, open a window on the side of the house that is more likely to catch the incoming breeze. Or if there is no noticeable breeze, choose the cooler or shadier side as your intake point. Then, on the opposite side of the room, or ideally the opposite side of the home, place a box fan in a window facing outward, so it blows indoor air outside rather than pulling outdoor air in. This outward-facing position is important because it creates negative pressure inside the space, which helps pull fresher air through the entire room in a smoother and more complete path. Keep any interior doors open between the intake window and the exhaust fan so the air has a clear route to travel. If you live in a 2-story home, you can make the effect even stronger by exhausting air from an upstairs window while drawing cooler air in through a lower-level window. Since hot air naturally rises and wants to escape upward, that vertical movement, combined with the fan, creates what is known as the stack effect and can dramatically improve total airflow through the house. When set up correctly, this is no longer just a fan in a window. It becomes a simple but highly effective cooling system built around the natural movement of air. When you compare this setup to traditional air conditioning, the difference in energy use is almost hard to believe. A standard box fan typically consumes around 50 to 100 watts of electricity, while even a small window air conditioning unit can draw 500 to over 1,000 watts depending on its size and usage. That means the fan-based approach can operate using a fraction of the energy, often as little as 1/10 or even less. Over the course of a full summer, that difference adds up quickly, translating into hundreds of dollars in potential savings for a single household. And unlike air conditioning, which must continuously compress and cycle refrigerants to maintain a lower temperature, this method works with the environment rather than against it, using naturally cooler air and simple airflow dynamics to achieve a similar level of comfort. The result is not just lower energy consumption, but a fundamentally more efficient way to stay cool. But here is where the story takes a turn that most people never stop to question. The reason this approach feels unfamiliar today is not because it is new or unproven, but because it was quietly pushed aside. Before modern air conditioning became widespread, homes were intentionally designed to stay cool using airflow alone. Windows were placed on opposite walls. Ceilings were higher. Interior layouts allowed air to move freely, and entire buildings were oriented to capture prevailing winds. Comfort was built into the structure itself. Then, as air conditioning became commercially viable, the priorities shifted. Builders no longer needed to think about airflow, orientation, or passive cooling, because mechanical systems could compensate for poor design. Over time, homes became more sealed. Windows became fewer or less functional, and layouts often blocked natural air paths entirely. It was not a coordinated effort to hide anything, but the outcome was the same. A simple, effective way of cooling spaces was gradually replaced by a system that required constant energy and ongoing cost. What was once common knowledge became something most people never learned in the first place. So now that you understand how this works, the next step is to actually put it into practice in a way that maximizes the effect. Start by using the setup in the evening when the outdoor air becomes cooler than the air inside your home, allowing that cooler air to move through the space and flush out the heat that is built up during the day. Let the system run continuously for several hours so that not only the air but also the walls, floors, and furniture release their stored heat. This process, often referred to as pre-cooling, effectively resets your home to a lower temperature baseline before the next day begins. Then, early in the morning before the outside temperature starts rising again, close your windows and block out direct sunlight with blinds or curtains to trap that cooler condition inside for as long as possible. Beyond just temperature, this constant air exchange also improves indoor air quality by removing pollutants, odors, and excess humidity that tend to accumulate in enclosed spaces. Over time, this means you are not only staying cooler, but also breathing cleaner air while reducing your reliance on energy-intensive systems. What makes this approach so powerful is not the fan itself, but the understanding behind it. The air around you is already capable of cooling your space. Your body is already designed to regulate its temperature efficiently, and your home already contains the materials that can store and release heat. When you align all of these elements correctly, you are no longer fighting the environment. You are working with it. And in a world that increasingly depends on more complex and expensive solutions, sometimes the most effective answer is simply remembering how things were meant to work in the first place.